Thank you, Thomas. We're going to hear more from Thomas McShane later on, and he's even going to ask a question. You're all very welcome to the first WEAll, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance of Ireland's WEAll Hub. And this is our virtual campfire, our first event that we've done since our launch in October. So this WEAll Campfire is really an exploration on the role of the artist in imagining a well-being economy. And this is what we're going to be looking at today with, we have a number of people, a few artists, I'll introduce them all later, but we have three artists, creatives, answering the question. We have Mel White with us, the poet that was in our launch event, who will be giving us a couple of poems and answering the same question. And we'll be hearing a little bit more from Thomas as we're doing some interaction. So you're all very welcome. I am in our virtual studio, which is out of a suitcase, and I've never done it before, so I'm a little bit panicked about the technology. But don't panic, Caroline will come in if I go out. And we're doing this blended, so I have some audience physically here, and now I think we're about 40 on the 35, 40, I can't see anything. So my objective today is just to keep things moving. I'm going to invite everyone when they're not speaking to just stay muted, and just to make it easy. And just to build a sense of community, I'd like to invite you all to maybe just say who you are in the chat. I recognize a lot of names here. Lovely to see you all. But if you want to just introduce yourself in the chat, that would be brilliant. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline White from FASTA, one of the steering group of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Hub in Ireland. Caroline will give us a bit of an introduction of what the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is. Over to you, Caroline.
Hi everyone, great to see you all. So my name is Caroline White, and I'm an ecological economist, and I work for FASTA, the Foundation for the Economics of Sustainability. And so as Davy said, I'm just going to briefly explain what the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, or WEAll, is, and then what the WEAll Hub for Ireland is. So WEAll is a global collaboration of organisations and alliances, movements and individuals working together to change the economic system to create a well-being economy, one that can deliver human and ecological well-being. And so WEAll has three main parts to the vision of a well-being economy. The first part is that policy needs to be framed in terms of human and ecological well-being, not simply economic growth. So as part of, if you like, the Beyond Growth movement. And, you know, recognizing that the purpose of the economy is not just simply expanding productivity all the time. A second part of the vision is that businesses need to provide dignified lives for their employees and exist to meet social rules and contribute to the regeneration of nature. And then a final part is that the rules of the economy are shaped by collaboration between government, business, and civil society. And as you'll have gathered from that list of 3 parts of the vision, there's a real emphasis on imagining the kind of future that we'd like to see. And we all know, of course, that there's lots of very severe problems in the world at the moment, and it's very easy to just come up with a litany of big, long list of crises and regrets for things that should have been done years ago and so on. But what we all members are doing is are certainly identifying the problems, but also working on building a vision of the future that can help to change our narrative about where we're going and help us to give us some bearings for where we want to move on to, rather than just reacting. So WEAll aims to essentially make itself redundant within a decade by catalysing economic system change in multiple countries. And one of the ways that it's doing this is by supporting the development of WEAll Hubs in different countries or cities or regions. And so WEAll Hubs are place-based groups that facilitate collaboration and activity towards building a wellbeing economy, and they link into the global movement. And at the moment, there are active hubs in 8 countries or regions, and they include New Zealand, Denmark, the Netherlands. And then there are more hubs that are being developed around the world, including in Brazil, Costa Rica, and East Africa. So it's getting to be quite spread out. And our Ireland hub began to be developed in late 2020 when FASTA and the European Health Futures Forum, which are both members of WEAll, joined with Social Justice Ireland and Cultivate, the Sustainable Ireland Cooperative, and individuals including Peter Doran of Queen's University School of Law in Northern Ireland, in order to form the core of the hub. And our vision in the Ireland hub, which as you can gather applies to the whole of Ireland, it aligns with that of President Michael D. Higgins, who said that new ideas are now required, and even more, their communication to citizens, ideas based on equality, universal public services, equity of access, sufficiency, sustainability. And our vision also resonates with the Northern Ireland Executive's plan, which was described in its most recent programme for government, which was to develop a framework for societal well-being, and a priorities plan consisting of actions for delivery. Last year, the Ireland Hub organised 2 online events that were a big success. The first one was an exploration to find out what kind of useful role a hub could play in Ireland, with a lot of audience participation. It was very much an exchange-based event. The second one was our online launch, and it featured some great speakers, the economist Katherine Trebeck, who's the co-author of the book The Economics of Arrival and one of the founders of WEAll, Jen Wallace of the Carnegie UK Trust, and Kate Raworth of Donut Economics fame. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of her. It was a great honour to have them as speakers, but we also had the huge honour at both events of having very significant for us artistic interventions with music from Belfast-based Paddy Flamenco, songwriter Conor Lawler, poet Bell White, and John Spillane as the bard. So this really made us think that it would be good to keep involving the arts, and we'll be hearing more about why we think that. I'm going to hand over now to Sean O'Conloyne and Peter Doran, my colleagues in the WEAll Hub. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Caroline. Hopefully Peter is there as well. We'll be talking a little bit later about Irish language and heritage and culture. But Peter and I wanted to a certain extent, give this a little bit of context. We decided we'd do it in the form of a conversation between the 2 of us. The linking in with what Caroline has just said, really the penny dropped for us after that session with Katherine Trebeck and Kate, where we were talking about limits, the limits to growth, even there are limits in the donut approach. And it was Mark Garvin who led us to think about really the limits are to what he called the imaginary. And at the time, that was a new word for me. I thought he was talking about limits to the imagination. But I'm going to hand over to Peter. Peter, you might like to explain to us what's the difference between imaginary and the imagination.
Okay, hi Sean. It's a pleasure to join all of you. Thank you very much. It seems that the phrase social imaginary comes from the philosopher Charles Taylor, and he was describing the way in which Western societies in particular conjure up their own moral purpose in the sense of a narrative and a set of aspirations and norms. And he had three areas in mind. He had the economy, of course, which is fairly central. The public sphere, the public space, the places of exchange and communication. And then our modes of governance, self-governance. And in my own work, I would add the sphere of self-regulation. I think this area of the attention economy and how we manage attention, how we dispose our attention and regulate ourselves within the public sphere and then the commercial and economic spheres is a very important dimension where we mediate the social imaginary, which is sometimes imposed from without, but is also created, reproduced through our own practices in everyday life. So that's the difference between the imagination and the social imaginary. The social imaginary is a philosophical concept, but it bridges that idea of social reproduction through human activity and imagination, but with a material foundation. And you might even say, but sometimes I would say that the state, for example, is a function of the well-armed imagination, you know, so that's a material base, it's a very concrete idea, as well as being a function of the human imagination, the collective imagination.
Yeah, and I suppose what really struck me is that I've been involved with FASTA for quite a number of years, and we've been talking a lot about different approaches, to a certain extent, questioning the whole approach to economics and growth and GDP, all the usual things that the environmentalists look at. But what I didn't really realize is that to a certain extent, the population at large and even ourselves are in this imaginary sphere where we are making all these assumptions. And it was highlighted to me very recently about, you know, agriculture is now in crisis in Ireland because they've suddenly, and I suppose people at large have suddenly realized that we're reliant on fertilizer from one part of the world and grain from another part of the world in order to feed animals who to a certain extent do an awful lot of damage to the environment here. And then at the end of it, we export an awful lot. We feed, the mantra is that we feed 40 million people from Ireland. But they're not we don't have 40 million people in Ireland, and we're not feeding the people in Ireland. we barely manage to give them some food, so we have to import an awful lot of food. And it really occurred to me that, you know, there's a perspective there that we really need to question, this whole, the dominant, if you like, perspective that employment, growth, and so on is success. And obviously certain individuals are very successful. So to a certain extent, that's why we started to look to where, you know, a new imaginary might come from. And you'll be hearing a little bit later on from Sandra Waddock, but we'd already been thinking a little bit about the perspective of artists and those who can create new approaches. And I was very struck by, when we started to read up about it, that artists have the power to make us wake up. You know, they allow us to see things. And I don't know, maybe Peter, do you have examples of artists making you wake up in the north?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think the very act of artistic creation, and especially what goes before it, you know, the pause, the silence, the need to interrupt what you've received and re-articulate and respond and create something new. That capacity, that ability is something very close to what we all have to do collectively in order to respond to the demands of the Anthropocene, the challenges of climate change and the wider ecological crisis. And that's the deep existential question, really, that civilizations, the Western civilization in particular, faces. So there's something quite a close parallel between the artistic act and the act that we all have to engage in reimagining societies that will be aligned to these very far-reaching demands on our economies and our ways of being in the world. Yes, there is a very good example that speaks to our focus on the island of Ireland. I think you and I, Sean, have shared an intuition from the beginning of this work, that this work, as part of a planetary and global network that has a very specific gift or contribution to make by looking at the island's history, its languages, its cultures, its history of colonialism, but also being part of the European project, that there's a very specific offering, if you like, in terms of articulating the possibilities of well-being and where these possibilities will emerge from our own stories, our own communities. And maybe the exemplar project is Field Day, the work of Brian Friel and Seamus Heaney and Stephen Ray. I think they saw and excavated that idea of James Joyce's, for example, that Ireland faces two ways. You know, we are part of that European modern project that is under severe critique at the moment, but they also excavated that experience of colonialism and that heritage. And part of the heritage that you're talking about, of course, that monoculture, the imposition of a certain way of viewing agriculture as an extension of industry, that began with our experience as the petri dish, if you like, for the colonial and plantation systems of England on the island.
And I was very struck recently, the Professor Whelan, Kevin Whelan, in a conversation on the Tommy Tiernan show, I studied the impact of the so-called famine, which was really, it was a starvation. There was plenty of food in the island, but we're still suffering psychologically from the famine. And Father Kirby and particularly Father has spoken about the way the Irish language might be used to restore what he called a renewal of our Europeanization, but also of self-confidence, that we have a deep psychological impact of the famine, and also how the famine to a certain extent took away the vestiges of the old Irish, the artistic approaches, the bardic life and everything else. But it also left very severe traces on us. And Father in particular, and then others have been writing about linking language and culture and heritage, which is all below the surface for us, linking them with ecology. Because we're dealing with almost like a heritage that is an ecology. I think we're known throughout the world for enjoying ourselves, for the crack, for storytelling, for mythology. I see Paddy Bush is there among the audience, and if we had time, we'd get him to recite Amergan's incantation when he first came to Ireland, you know, but it was an incantation about nature. And the Irish language is the epitome of linking nature and linking place, linking logantacht, as we say. And the Gaeltachts, as they remain the vestiges of a 2,000-year heritage, are still there. And they're certainly in parts in Gweedore and Corcalgina, they live this, almost live the mythology, they live the stories, they live the music, and they are the links for us with the past. Later on, when I'll be introducing our musician, I think it's absolutely striking. You heard him there playing some Irish music. He's actually an American, but in the past 4 years, he has learned Irish, and in 4 years, he's become a fluent Irish speaker, and he sings sean-nós. He'll sing us a song at the end. But yet we've spent 100 years of liberation, and we still are in the, if you like, the monoculture, English language based to a great extent anyway, approach to our values and traditions. Now, as some people there know, I'm very much into traditional music and heritage. So it's not true, I'm painting an extreme picture there, but I think there's a possibility of a total renaissance in our understanding of what heritage is. And to a certain extent, Sandra has written, Sandra Waddock, that we'll hear from later, she's written about artists being able to give a compass for the imaginary going forward. They can not only see things in a different way to us, see both with our, if you like, allow us to understand in a different way, but also they can give a compass forward. I'm reminded of one of my favorite poets, Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill, and when she talked many years ago in Irish, and she was hesitant about being translated into English, but she said, Tommy Domanta were damned a Grafuracha. Tommy Domanta a Grafuracha. And it's a gorgeous poem, but it was probably about 30 years at least before its time. And it's a really good example, I think, of how a poet can see things that we didn't really see at the time, you know. So how do you think, Peter, that artists can help us into the future, and particularly all of us as artists?
Well, yes, I think some of the most exciting ideas and challenges around reimagining our ways of being in the world are coming from places outside the West, outside the Western experience. So, for example, there's a great conversation about a concept of buen vivir in Ecuador. It's an indigenous Andean philosophy that emphasizes community well-being, reciprocity, solidarity, and harmony with Mother Earth, for example, right? A deep relational, ecological understanding of our well-being as founded on interdependence. So part of that kind of thinking is summed up in the language of the pluriverse from Arturo Escobar. He talks about a world fit for many worlds, a world that accommodates many worlds and realities. And our cultural creatives, our artists, especially here on the island, have always been potential gateways to that pluriverse, to that sense that there are other ways of being, and that they trigger, invite, provoke, and offer ways to imagine how to turn those ideas into ways of life. So I think that's the intuition that we share, Sean, in terms of the WEAll platform on the island of Ireland. And I think our time, we've gone beyond our time, actually.
Gone beyond our time. So we'll hand back to Davy, and Davy, take us to the real talkers tonight, the artists.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next artistic interlude with Mel White. I am delighted to be introducing an award-winning spoken word poet, a climate activist, and a communitarian. Mel now is a neighbour of mine in Clough-Jordan and works with me in the Food Hub, our community farm, and has caused quite a stir in our last launch before Kate Raworth. So what we're going to do is invite Mel to do 2 short poems in our little piece, and I'm going to ask the question, what is the role of the artist? So Mel, you're very welcome. So
thanks, Davey. So I'll go straight into a poem to start off, and then I'll have a little bit of a chat in between, and then go to the second poem afterwards. I'm here to make connections, like circuit boards or flint and spark, art and academic query. This is a love song. This is a dance of mathematics. This is poetry inspired by economic theory. And I think, how can we put these things together? How can we put these things together? How can we put these things together? From Kalahari Bushmen, Amazonian tribes, I have searched for answers, wading back through time. I left the 20th century in 1996 with sepia-tinted blinkers and a horse I bid guineas for at auction. I didn't miss the washing machine, scrubbing clothes on a sunlit verge with a stream tumbling by. Didn't miss television, lit up with a book and candlelight. Wagon wheels turned like clockwork cogs, unwinding time, denying industry with every revolution. With a plod of hooves, a steady metronome, and the rhythmic creak of timbers, I hummed the slow tune of buds unfurling, crab apples, a measured history, not in battles or dates of kings recorded in history, but at horse pace, 10 miles a day. I was searching for a time before hours were counted or packaged or sold, before the working week was a uniform and we traded our time for appliances. Searching for life before corporations read our bedtime stories, consumer greed was sprinkled on our cornflakes and profit-driven formula was bottle-fed to babies. Searching for a time that I could never find, trying to turn back time, anticipate the grime of seas filled with plastics and leaking batteries, fossil fuel machines and third world factories. And if I couldn't make the clocks turn backwards, I had to find a place where log fires and solar panels could meet for coffee. Traditional crafts and software could make plans and discuss ideas, where recycled plastic and organic fabric could share a bed. This is a love song. I'm here to make connections, putting old things in new ways, fresh ideas in ancient frames, circuit boards with flint to spark the flames of innovation, past and future working in collaboration. If creation is energy, then synergy is MC squared, where C is a sustainable constant multiplied by critical mass. And if I can use Einstein as a metaphor, combining poetry and science, we can put anything together. We can do anything together. We can be anything together.
Fantastic, Mel, as always. So this time we're going to ask you the same question we're asking everyone tonight. What do you see as the role of the artist in helping us imagining a well-being economy?
Well, I think it's huge, apart from being my life's work and everything else. But I think there's a couple of factors. I mean, one, we can reach a different audience through the arts, the people who are already attracted to the arts. You know, that sometimes in these circles, we're preaching to the converted, we're talking to the same people all the time. And there's a way to kind of bring in new audiences. And I think that's quite critical. Like there is a sense of urgency, I think, in the world. We do need to see changes happening quickly. So the more we can reach out to different people, different audiences, get different people kind of engaged with ideas, the better. So like say before the pandemic, I was going to regular poetry events where I'd be the only person who was, at the time I was writing a lot about climate change, and you know, everybody else was writing about, you know, whatever, love or trees or mental health, or, you know, not belittling anybody else's subject matter. But, you know, for me, that was really a place to say I can bring these things that I'm concerned about to a place where other people aren't talking about these things. And some of the feedback I got in those events was really kind of fascinating to hear how it was reaching people who wouldn't be reached otherwise. And you know, I had an older man come to me at the end of one night and say, you know, this is really the elephant in the room, that nobody's talking about climate change, and here you are coming and doing a poem about it. So like those, you know, the little moments kind of feel really meaningful. You know, there's a school of thought in poetry circles that says like poetry shouldn't be didactic. You shouldn't be trying to instruct people or educate. And like I completely disagree with that. I mean, I think it's absolutely the responsibility of the artist to try to convey a message, particularly the learning and understanding that I think I have, that, you know, I'm sort of wanting to share that. Another factor is that through art, we can appeal to people on an emotional level that, you know, that sometimes facts and hard data just don't really have that same kind of impact on people, that, you know, we can talk about things like, you know, 1.5 degrees warming and people close off and they stop listening. But, you know, if you can say something, you know, that reaches somebody, I think like Greta Thunberg's framing of your house is on fire, I think that's a huge, like, changing the way you say something. If it suddenly becomes so much closer to home, people feel that. They feel it emotionally. It's no longer like the house plant that you don't care about, that you'd leave behind. Like the earth actually is home. And, you know, the way we frame things, the way we express things, I mean, that's a creative metaphor that really kind of lands with people in a completely different way. And I think if people are affected emotionally, they're far more likely to actually take it on board and really make a change or
exactly.
And I mean, I think what we need above all as a species is a change in values, to really take stock of what's important, and to try to get back to kind of living in a way that's in accordance with the most important things. Like, what is the most important things? And to do that, I think we need to reframe the way we see, way we think as a species, how we think about ourselves and our place in the world. And we need a new narrative. And that brings me on to my next poem, which I'm going to do again, the one I did at the launch event, The New Mythology, because I do think it's very relevant to the theme. I think of a mythology is the frame that our worldview sits inside, the way we understand the world. So in the past, that could have been through, if it rains or it doesn't rain, it's because the gods are pleased or they're not pleased or whatever else, that they're angry with us. And we, at the moment, our worldview is, or our mythology is really based around things like rational economic man and GDP. And, we have all these things that people kind of believe that it's better to get 2 for the price of 1 is better, and to get things cheaper and to get more, and very fixed as a society within these kind of narratives. And this is like the mythology. And I think it's absolutely the artist's role to start saying, like, what else can we see? How else can we explain the world? How else can we start believing that the world is, and getting rid of, some of the things that we're stuck in, and the scarcity and separation mindsets and things like that, that really kind of narrow us down. So really by telling stories, I think.
Brilliant. Well, do you want to tell us another story in your immutable style? So back to you, Mel.
Yeah, so the new mythology then. It started in a dark place. Oh, there were those who believed it started with a big bang, and those who believed it started with a word from the lips of one man. But the truth was, it started underground. It started the way all things start to grow. It started in a dark place in the harsh depths of winter. It started with a seed bomb. It started under the ground, in the graves of Palestinians, in the rubble that remained of a town, in the eyes of a woman covered by a burqa. It started in a dark place. It started in the guts of fish suffocated by plastic, in the last gasps of the polar bear, in the horn of a rhino prized by poachers. It started when sea levels rose, when the earth was quaking and people fled their homes amid floods and droughts and hurricanes. It started in a dark place. It started in tower blocks, in tenements, in homeless shelters, hobbit holes and squats with windows boarded, curtains closed. It started underground. In tunnels dug to protest the cutting of trees and the laying of pipelines. It started with campaigns and petitions, banners and parades. It started in student bars and warehouse parties, at campfires when guitars were passed around. It started with conversation. It started with education. It started with meditation. It started the way all things start to grow. It started with slowing down. It started with stopping. It started when we stopped pushing forward and pulled back into the earth. It started a cycle of rebirth when the trees had shed their leaves and people stopped believing in eternal growth. It started with letting go of greed, with letting there be winter, letting seeds could sprout again. It started in a dark place. It started in barren soil, in former carbon sinks where forests were clear-felled, in arid desert scrub where nomads dwelled. It started in the ears of those who could hear the whispers of water. In the stories told to their daughters, it started with listening to the moon. It started in silence. It started in unspoken dialects. It started without violence. It started with a vision. When mankind was asleep, it started creeping into dream time and wrapping around our feet with the tenacity of bindweed. It started to unite us, to rewrite the pathology learnt in our childhood. It started a new mythology, a new awareness. The biosphere is shared. People started to care. They started to look for solutions. Ended pollution, ended oppression, ended the perception that human nature's cruel and survival of the fittest meant every man for himself. It ended poverty and wealth. It ended war. Oh, there were those who believed it would end with a big bang and those who believed there was no end to the damage done by man. But the truth was, it ended the way it all began, shrank back into the earth and refertilized the soil, prepared the ground for the future. It ended the way all things ceased to grow.
Fantastic, Mel. Thank you so much. Thank you. Always has such an impact. Really breaks through, I think, spoken word. So thanks, Mel. Okay, so we have a small panel discussion of cultural creatives and artists. We have Kevin Murphy, who's now the CEO of Derry Playhouse and has curated a fantastic resource around cultural commoning. We have, there, look at that studio there. We have Rosie O'Reilly, who is the head of Workhouse Union. Rosie Lynch, sorry, Rosie. It's been a long day. We've had a full day with the Arts Council already. Rosie Lynch from the Workhouse Union, and Workhouse Union are really looking at creative placemaking and neighbourhood making in Callan. And we're delighted to be joined in tonight's session with Matt Baker is from the Stove Network in Drumfeast, which Matt is an engaged artist and runs the Stove Network. I'm going to actually just ask each of them to just quickly say who they are before I ask you the question and ask for the reflections. So Kevin, maybe just a few sentences about yourself or where you're coming from.
Oh, well, as you say, I'm the CEO of the Playhouse. I guess I would count myself as a musician by trade, and I would also count myself as a creative citizen. So I very much see the link between being someone who's creative and someone who's got civic responsibilities. Great,
I love that, creative citizen. That's a nice one. Rosie, did you want to just say a few words, sir?
Yes, so I'm Rosie. I'm based in Callan in County Kilkenny. And I trained as a visual artist, but for the past 10 years, I've been very much more in a kind of project management and creative producer role, working with communities of place and interest around placemaking and public engagement. But at the core of all of Workhouse Union's work is using the arts and creativity as a tool for the real tool, I suppose, to break through a lot of the barriers we have around public planning and participation.
Fantastic. And Matt Baker, all the way from Scotland.
Good evening, everyone. I only met Rosie yesterday, but it seems that we kind of share quite a lot. I too trained as a visual artist. I'm a sculptor to trade. And 10 years ago, I started with a group of other artists in my hometown of Dumfries. We started a collective where we aimed to have a conversation with our town about itself. The town was falling on hard times. That has grown to the point where we were the first artist to run development trust in the UK, and we've started a regeneration scheme with social enterprise employing about 40 people now. And I basically have become a facilitator of creativity for our town, involving all of our town. Our sort of phrase really is grow your own culture, which is the way that we aim to work with our town.
Great. So I'm asking the same question tonight to the three panelists and the question we asked Mel earlier. So maybe Kevin, could you share any insights in how you might see the role of the artist in imagining a well-being economy?
Well, I agree, of course, a lot with what Mel has said, but I guess we should be clear about our field of endeavour, the bit of the well-being economy that we're really active in, which I think is the field of meaning. So I think whatever that aspect of the well-being economy that deals with meaning, the arts is really present there. Then there are three main areas I wrote down in my preparation, thinking briefly about it as I was wolfing some dinner down just before we started. But an artist, I think, can definitely open up a space. So, and that space is for new feeling, for new thought, for new connections, and for new dialogue. So definitely the role of the artist is to open up space for those things to happen. Again, very clearly what Mel said around stories. So we can tell the stories, or artists can tell the stories that help transform perspectives. And I think they're stories that often inspire action. as well as changing the way you think about something. And then the third thing I wrote down is that again, as Mel says, because of the emotional language, art and artists connect diverse people across divides. And that's a very important thing if you're imagining a new way of going about stuff. So to some extent, though, if you zoom back out again, the artist has really been heralding the well-being economy for quite some time, because really most of the value that the artist brings is in well-being. It's not in finance. It's in that other side of our economy. So there's a few thoughts.
It's really interesting. I love the renew feeling, renew thought, and renew connection. Is that what you said? Renew thought? Or what did you say your second one?
Well, I think what I said, I mean, that might be nicer, but it's opening up a space. Yeah, could be to renew, but I just meant for new feelings and thoughts, and dialogue and connections. But yeah, but equally to renew them.
Nice. I love the open up space. It came up a lot today in our Place Matters event we were doing with the Arts Council. It's something that both Rosie and Matt have a lot of experience in. So who's next? Matt's got the microphone. You passed it to Matt. Rosie, did you? Matt, could you share any insights from Scotland on maybe the role of the artist in imagining a well-being economy?
I'll have a go. I think Mel just demonstrated one of those roles. I don't know, well, I assume everyone else felt the same, but when somebody's making work like that or experiencing work like that, our brain shifts into a slightly different gear and moves beyond the everyday and into that imaginary space. But I actually don't think I don't think that's quite enough. I think what was it? The Christie Commission said that it's only something like 15% of our population actively engage in cultural activity. And I'm quite long in the tooth with this sort of what's the role of artists. I was courted by climate change scientists for many years who were thinking that their message wasn't getting through and they just needed some artists to sort of make it a bit more accessible to people. But I think it's something more radical than that. I think we need to it's actually about making everybody function culturally. It's about a really deep participation in culture is what I think is required for the well-being economy. Which means that what's the role of artists? The role of artists is to take a facilitating role, not just they still make their own work and inspire us in the way that they do, but I think part of that role is one of facilitation, and that is in the depth right into early education, into health and well-being in the sense of people being well, mental health, or the art involved in all of that. If you go back to the beginnings of the arts counselling in Britain, which was in the Second World War, the culture was being used in to keep morale up, and they formed the Arts Council. There were two strands. There was the making your own culture strand, and there was the professionally produced culture strand, and distributing that. And that participatory strand disappeared very quickly. Bizarrely, it was John Maynard Keynes who became arts minister just after the war, and his phrase was, we're going to fund the best, not the most. And they took away that participatory strand, and we got left with fun culture being something that was produced by other people and then enjoyed or understood by others. And I think we need to, for a well-being economy, we need to reverse that. We need to move to a radical participation in culture.
Lovely. Thanks, Matt. And Rosie, same question to you. Any insights from your perspective, from your practice, in how an artist or creatives might help us imagine good living, a well-being economy?
Yeah, I mean, I have, just from the conversation this evening, I've lots of thoughts popping up in it. Just to say, we've Davey, myself, and Matt and some others of the audience here this evening, Carla, we've been sitting all day at a Arts Council conference looking at people, place and matter. Places matter, very much about the relationship between people, place and the arts. What's lovely being here this evening is I feel like just the conversation, having the music, having the poetry, I'm in a much more liminal space. Maybe it's because it's the evening as well, but I definitely feel like actually the artistic side of my brain has opened up in this evening's conversation, which is lovely. So just to, whereas the rest of the day I've been quite a practical sort of, feet on the ground. So just to say that the arts, and maybe that's not artists, but creativity can be used to create this liminal space that I think is really important in well-being and in imagination. I had another thought just at the beginning of the conversation, thinking about language. I think the arts and creativity give us tools, and these are new languages that can be really helpful in how we make meaning of the world at the moment. And I think definitely the Irish language is a tool to think differently about nature. I'm thinking of Katherine Trebeck's new book, Thin Places, and she's dealing with the trauma of the Troubles about place and using the Irish language as a way to renew her relationship to nature and to herself. And in the room tonight is Aoife Desmond, who is a visual artist from Cork. And Aoife also uses, nature and mythology as a way of looking at our present time and ecology. And she's at the moment making a new video piece called River Branching. River Branching, is that correct, Aoife? Yeah. And it's looking at the route of the River Lee going into Cork. And this is a pilgrimage. And so there is a lot of artists at the moment who I think are kind of tapping into the liminal space that the arts give us kind of in society to think differently. But I suppose I would very, very much though also resonate with what Matt is speaking about, that opportunity that Aoife and Kerry have been able to access through the arts to understand the world around us and our life also is a tool that everybody can access and should be able to access. And I think just in my own work in Callan, I don't know if many of you are familiar with Callan, but it's a town in Kilkenny that has a very, very has had a long history of artists living in the town and creating, there's lots of different practices. But KCAT Art Centre was an art centre developed for and by people with disability. And in KCAT I see every day just the unbelievable tool that the arts has, the tool that is given to people through the arts around just ways of communicating if people don't have maybe the spoken language, that the visual arts is an incredible tool, choreography is an incredible tool, theatre is an incredible tool. So yeah, I would really just really, I suppose, resonate with what Matt has said, is that, you know, everybody can access the tools of creativity and should, but that's a big ask when a lot of people just don't feel that they have that access or aren't given that access.
Thanks, Rosie. Really insightful. I think maybe just to we've not got too much time. I might just do a quick round of if there's any reflections there from each other. So just from the panel. Kevin, anything from what you've just heard there from Rosie or Matt, or anything that's emerged, anything to a closing statement, perhaps?
Well, maybe that sense of becoming active within the space. Generally speaking, yes, it's about opening a space, but it's also what action comes from that. And I think that sort of that idea about the artist as a facilitator, or the artist, if you like, kind of tapping into the roots of culture around them, the way of life of people around them, and helping people to see how that can be transformative seems very clear. So there is something that, where there's an inspiration or a catalyst happening as a result of the artist opening the space. So both things need to be held together.
I like the idea of the artist as catalyst, or the creative as catalyst, and the liminal spaces sort of, to me right now, resonates with the transition we're in, that we're in a liminal space, shifting worldviews, paradigms, and looking for ways to leverage that shift potentially.
Well, perhaps
Rosie,
sorry, Davey, not to kind of keep you on there, but actually that facilitative role has also been an artist able to, or help people deal with that complexity.
Yeah.
Because it is a complex space, it's a fluid space, it's ever moving, it's not very certain. It can be full of all sorts of challenges, and the artist can be quite useful at helping navigate that.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Rosie, any final thoughts, reflections? Microphone in your...
Well, I suppose I'm really excited and fascinated to see how the kind of wellbeing platform continues in Ireland. I think it's an area that has been developed much more in Scotland and in the UK. People like the Carnegie Trust supporting this idea of well-being as central to society. And I think, it isn't a conversation that it has even really started in Ireland. So really excited to see where your platform brings you. And also excited that the kind of role of art and the social imaginary is going to be part of that conversation. So yeah, just really, it was lovely to join you all here this evening online by this little studio in Carlow. It's like we're on TV. But yeah, just a very exciting conversation, and something I think has been long in the making.
Thanks, Rosie.
Yeah, it is an exciting conversation, but I think it's a conversation that has to be based on justice, I think, and that was what Rosie was saying, what sparked in me there. When she was referring to people with disabilities that she were working in the Callan project. And I think that is one of the things that the arts can bring to the table around the wellbeing economy, is that inclusion agenda. I think the arts does have a really strong record and ability to reach out to groups that are not often heard in these conversations, and facilitate their voices to be heard through the creative tools that we've got at our disposal. So I would like to put that on the table as well, that we'll bring that too.
Yeah, I think that was really important today in our conversations, the idea of diversity, inclusion, and a just transition. We need to ensure marginal voices are included. Well, thanks, Rosie and Matt. I know it was short. Thanks, Kevin. And I'm going to bring Sean in to introduce our next little insight coming up. So, Sean.
Great, thank you, Davey. And just before I introduce Sandra, I just want to mention, because Peter and I intended to mention special links with Scotland, which we omitted to do, because we're very attracted to, if you like, both the heritage, language, and other links that we have with Scotland, which is a space maybe we could develop, and particularly because the hub is an all island-based hub, so to speak. Anyway, I know it's really a great pleasure for me to introduce Sandra Waddock. Sandra is a professor in the School of Management in Boston College, and Boston College is a very interesting background, and Sandra indeed has, and with many linkages. Boston College was set up with one of its main purposes to help Irish people be educated in the States. And that's a long, long time ago, after the famine. Sandra herself has been involved from the start with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And particularly, I think she's had an input around the shaping of narratives in the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. So she's a bit of an expert on that. but she's also run programs for executives, Irish executives in the States. She has devoted a good bit of her research into this notion of transformational catalysts, and is part of an organization called Bounce Beyond. And then particularly, one of her areas of research is into this notion that we're debating tonight, which is about the artist and the role of the artist as a catalyst. And of course, I should mention Sandra herself is a little bit of an artist. She's a folk musician as well, with Irish roots. So over to you, Sandra. We're very interested in your insights from that conversation and maybe some examples from your own experience of artists.
Thanks, Sean. It's a real pleasure to be here. Let me see if I can sort of go through some of my thoughts very quickly about and reflections on what we just heard. So I'm going to start with a quote from Fabiana Rodriguez, who's an artist. She says, "Arts are central, not peripheral to social change. Artists don't think like policy folks. They don't think like organizers, and that's a good thing. They think big visionary ideas. Of course, not all artists do that, but a lot of them do." Matt talked about that a little bit, the radical function that art can have. And the idea that, in a sense, and I agree with this, we can all be artists. And Sean and Peter talked earlier about the social imaginary, and economic thinking is built on a very specific, certain social imaginary, and it's very limiting, and we're all caught up in it. Its foundational memes, the core units of culture, include market primacy, markets will solve all our problems, self-interested profit maximization, both for people and for companies, the idea that less government is better, and the notion that we can grow endlessly on a finite planet, and whatever the consequences, because after all, as Margaret Thatcher said, there's no such thing as society. Well, maybe not so much. I mean, in Ireland, you are a very communal people. Art and music are central to, I think, how you live, although I have not spent any time in Ireland. And Thatcher also said, there is no alternative to what we know as this version of economics. And the Wellbeing Alliance is trying to counter that particular social imaginary by creating a new social imaginary. And social imaginaries, how do they get created? It is through the creative expression of new ideas that people bring about new social imaginaries. And as we've already heard, social imaginaries are common understandings or meanings that we all share. There's something they get into our head and they kind of stick there. And Charles Taylor is one of the originators, as Peter mentioned as well. So these social imaginaries can help us bridge from here to there, from here to the future, in a prospective way, not in just looking at the past, but in imagining something altogether new. And artists are the ones who have the capacity to see in new ways, to envision. Some claim that artists are as much as 100 years ahead of their time, whatever their time might be. But they also articulate unspoken rules and the values and the truths and the priorities in the culture. Just think of what we heard from Mel's second poem and how she so neatly and succinctly articulated so many of the problems that we're facing in a way that, you know, a long essay isn't going to do, although that's a creative process too, I would argue. I have a friend named Tracy O'Connell, who's obviously of Irish heritage. She wrote a song called The Troubles about Ireland, which really puts in place the impact of the troubles that Ireland has gone through in an emotional and visceral way. And it's that role of narrative broadly defined, whether it's visual narratives or stories or other kinds of art that really brings us to new understandings. So it moves us from scientific kinds of understanding, the scientific imaginary that wants to fragment everything and bring it to its smallest pieces, to more holistic understandings. It takes humans out of this idea that we can dominate nature, we should have dominion over nature, to an understanding that, as David Corton always says, we are living beings born of a living planet, and forget that at our peril. And it can help us to overcome this neoliberal economic thinking by creating a new way of being in the world that is based in equity and social justice and ecological flourishing for all. It would tap into both new ideas that come and are visionary, but also very ancient ideas. So for instance, you might consider the Pan-African notion of Ubuntu. I am because we are, as part of a new narrative. We are born in community. We humans need community. Our babies can't survive without the village, or at least the parents to support them. We are, as Lakota in the United States say, we are all related, all our relations, the mitakuya oyasin idea. So collectively, art builds a new social imaginary, and it helps us to see things in new ways. And we can all think of protests, and for instance, in the 1960s, all the songs, the Pete Seeger in the United States talking about "we shall overcome" as a way of bringing social justice, more social justice to the United States. Or even especially photography. Think of the impact of the first vision of the whole Earth, called the Blue Marble, on people's consciousness, and how that's changed our perception of the world. So that, or the similar photo called Earthrise, which shows the moon rise, the Earth rising over the moon. As Earth is this small little planet out there in this vast space with no boundaries that you can see on it. So Earth art is powerful because it helps us see, hear, learn, be in new spaces, in new places, and it persuades and changes and broadens us. And so it's powerful. Thank you. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you so much there, Sandra. And if anyone's interested in hearing Sandra a bit more faster, Caroline and Sean did a fantastic podcast with Sandra and her work. So I am going to introduce Chris Chapman, who is the lead facilitator resource, which is at the Byrne School of Art. He's working on some very interesting projects there. I've been facilitating with Chris for over 15 years, and Chris is going to hold a little 10-minute process to engage everyone in the question. So I'm going to hand over to you, Chris.
Brilliant. So I've put in the chat Mentimeter links for this evening, which give you two choices. There's a hyperlink there. There's a hyperlink in the chat, which if you click on that, it will open another window on your computer. Or alternatively, if you want to use a smartphone, you can go to menti.com, menti.com, and it will ask you for an event code. And today's event code is 9730415. I'll repeat that once or twice. So Mentimeter is an audience participation software at one level, but also I was sitting here thinking maybe it's collective process art. It's a way that we're all actually going to create something together. So if you click on that link, or as I say, if you go to menti.com and use the event code 9730415, you will have a question appear on your screen, and I've just put that on my shared screen, hopefully that will come up okay. So the question you'll be asked is, what fresh insights do you have now about the potential role of artists in catalysing a wellbeing economy? And we will see bit by bit the answers that come up. So when we say fresh insights, it might be things that are landing for you in the course of the last hour, things that are becoming clearer for you. Maybe it was all a bit foggy and messy and something's got a little bit more clarity now. Maybe it's something that you feel really strongly about, that you're really pissed off about, and you just want to say, I really feel about this, I'm really angry about this, or whatever. So it's a very general question, but we're just really, for the 30, 40 of us that are involved in this process here now tonight, what might we create together over the next few minutes in terms of capturing our fresh insights and hopefully helping this evening to be something of a launching pad into a continuing process as well. So if you, as I say, go into either the link that's in the chat or menti.com 9730-415 as the event code, and just type in words. It'd be lovely if we could type in pictures, but words or symbols or whatever that capture something around your fresh insights.
And while we're doing that, we're going to have another artistic interlude. So I'm going to invite Thomas McShane, who introduced and will be closing. Thomas, would you like to maybe just give us another tune while people are inputting their insights? And you can see the insights coming up on the screen, just for some inspiration.
Absolutely. So I'll be playing the Andante from Bach's Second Violin Sonata.
Thanks so much, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas. That was fantastic, lovely interlude. And back to Chris for some reflections on that. Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks, Thomas and Davey. Yeah, I've just been writing down some of the key words about the roles that have been coming up. And so I hesitate to call it poetry, but I'll just try and capture some words that seem to be present in what's coming up on the Mentimeter, and carry on typing more stuff in, and we'll capture it all for afterwards as well. So some of the roles we've got: guides, enablers, facilitators, pausers, amplifiers, models and compasses, synergizers, storytellers, catalyzers, activators, builders, envisioners, namers, permission givers, heart people, sex workers, questioners, radicals, and hopefully there's more coming in as well, but they were some of the words that were hitting me along the way.
Thanks, Chris. That was brilliant. We're going to capture all of this. So anything you want to put in chat, links, direction, and resources, feel free. And you can continue to add to the Mentimeter now. But if you want to stop your screen, Chris. Okay, we're going to go for a little reflection, a short reflection now from the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. We're going to start with Peter. Peter, you there?
Hi, David. Thank you very much. Yes, I must say I'm very encouraged by all of the contributions. I think it has been a very affirming experience. In many ways, the actual event today has been a kind of a rehearsal, a microcosm, if you like, of what the platform is seeking to do. We are all engaged in cultivation of ourselves, our imaginations, and forms of resistance in pursuit of justice as well. I just want to say one addition, just to take a little bit further some of the points that were raised about neoliberalism. When we think about the 3 or 4 elements of the social imaginary, the economic, the public sphere, and the self-governance, it's clear that we're living through a moment that has seen the colonization, if you like, by the economic dimension of the other 2 spheres. So the overwhelming challenge really is to really look at how that process of colonization, how the economic and neoliberal story has gotten over our skin. And they say that the most successful ideologies, of course, are invisible. You know, it has given us the metaphors that we live by: competition, hyper-individualism, consumerism, scarcity. So the one thing that I would emphasize alongside so much of what we've heard is that there's a job of unlearning and undoing the ways that we have been taught and seduced into living. But of course, the neoliberal project, part of it is about sundering our memory, sundering our access to other ways of being. It exhausts us. You know, many of us are time poor. The outer exhaustion of the planet's resources, its regenerative capacity, is accompanied by an inner exhaustion, an exhaustion of our inner interior lives, our contemplative capacity, and our imaginative capacity. So in many ways, the invitation is to remember that we don't have to accept that what one person said, that joyless quest to joy, that we can step into a new age of enchantment, a new experience of intimacy and joy in the everyday, and begin to understand through the encounter with the arts and cultural creatives, that the alternative worlds are there waiting for us to step into. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. And I'm going to hand straight over to you, Sean, I think, to close and bring Thomas in.
Colette.
Colette.
Sorry, Colette.
No problem. No bother. Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, I would have to echo what Peter said in terms of that real sense of building a community and looking at alternatives. I was particularly struck by Mel's interventions, and she was talking about taking stock of what's important and that need to reframe how we think and build that new narrative, and that beautiful poem around the need for a new mythology. And then, you know, listening to Kevin and Matt and Rosie when they were talking about, you know, what the space of an artist really is. So, you know, that piece around connection and around stories to transform perspectives, around being a community facilitator and a facilitator of creativity. And I just thought that was, you know, really great. And that whole idea around relationships between people and place. And that is something that certainly, you know, we would be advocating for very strongly in relation to this whole concept of right relationships. So if you're looking to build a society, then it's on that concept of right relationships with yourself in terms of autonomy, right relationships with each other, right relationships with the environment, with communities, with governments, and what those right relationships are built on, and the whole need for the development of a new social contract, of something that is between the state and citizens, that is equitable, that is rights-based. And I, you know, again, that came through very strongly. Another thing that I really enjoyed listening to was around this concept. And again, Sandra was talking about, you know, future thinkers and big thinkers, and the arts allow for that kind of much bigger kind of thought and that almost blue sky thinking. And again, to try and harness that, because something that's often missing from policy is the, you know, what if everything was possible? Why don't we work from there as opposed to building on what we already have, which may not be sufficient, and in many ways, certainly in relation to the environmental side of things, is completely insufficient. So I like that idea of kind of opening it up completely. I would say, though, what I was expecting to hear, and I think Mel did touch on it a little, was in relation to the way that artists communicate a message. So for people like me who are very much embedded in the policy space, and I feel like the corporate suit in the room almost, usually I'm the bearded lefty in every room, but I think, you know, that idea of using the arts to be able to convey a message to a very broad audience. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the arts, but I'm also a huge fan of artists from a variety, a diversity of backgrounds, because I think you can reach an audience that, you know, your general policy methodologies wouldn't reach. So, you know, when I think of the kind of artists that I would follow, and, you know, they talk to people from very working class backgrounds, and they talk to people from migrant backgrounds, and, you know, they're building this consciousness around the status quo and the need for change. And I think there's a huge role for the arts in doing that. And I loved, I'm going to finish on this point, I loved Rosie's piece around, you know, that visual arts piece for those who don't use the spoken language, whether that's through disability or it's through being a part of a new community, that can allow for almost a consultative process, a deliberative democratic process, where you can bring people together, even if they don't share a language, they'll still be able to give a contribution that is meaningful. And because of the fact that policy touches all of us, no matter who we are, how old we are, it's really important that we all have that say in whatever way that can be accommodated. So I think that was a really useful contribution, and certainly something that I would be taking forward as well. Thank you. Thanks,
Colette, and thanks, Peter. Very insightful. So now I'm at the stage to introduce Sean. So Sean, you're going to give us our final words. Someone's asking in the chat, Sean, maybe you can direct them where this video might be when we get it up.
Yeah, I think Caroline has responded, and we're recording it obviously, and we send it out to anybody who is on Eventbrite, the link to the recording in due course. And that reminds me a couple of things I want to say before we close out. One is, if you want to be on our mail list, if you're not on it already, and maybe Caroline, you might put up the link again. I know you put it already. I think we have to do this with your own permission. But if you want to know about future events or keep in touch with us, please put your name on the list. You can probably also do that on any of the participating organizations in the hub. That's Cultivate, Social Justice Ireland, EHFF, and FASTA, and Queens. I imagine, Peter, you have a website. But anyway, any of those, or contact us. So there's one other thing we want you to do, and that is really, you've put some thoughts up on the Mentimeter, but if you have any other thoughts or suggestions that you're thinking about now, about how you would like to help us, or you might like to contribute to the creation of, if you like, a new social imaginary on the island of Ireland, we'd love to hear from you. Or even if you have just some ideas about tonight, or about what other future events, please put them in the chat, and we'll take them up later on. Thank you. And so before I introduce Thomas McShane, and he does a final song, Peter mentioned at the very beginning of this, and I don't think he mentioned where it came from. It was a very little quote, and it really struck me in the preparation. It was about the fiddle stops and the dance delays. It's about pausing after the music. Or there's another version of it, the fiddle stops and the dancers pause. And I was fascinated by that as a fiddler. So I went looking it up. Peter had mentioned it, it's Goethe who wrote it, and it's in Faust. But what actually came up, and I hadn't realized the words, those of you who are Leonard Cohen's fans will know that on his disc, Closing Time, there is a song in it called Closing Time, and I never paid a huge amount of attention to the words, but the line is in there as well. And I'm thinking of the artists as being fiddlers, but the line in Leonard Cohen's song is, it's hell to pay when the fiddler stops, it's closing time. And it's quite profound, and when you think about it, if you think of artists as being our catalysts and our fiddlers, so to speak. So anyway, may I now introduce Thomas McShane, or I knew him as Thomas up to very recently. I think I mentioned I met Thomas on the beach down in Iverach at Aigshin the Bríd, and I was absolutely fascinated by this guy who was fluent in Irish, and only discovered afterwards that he's only been learning it for 4 years. He comes from North Carolina, and by a strange quirk of coincidence, some of his ancestors at least come from very close to us here, from a beautiful little pub in Manorhamilton, which is only about 8 miles from where we are. And Bríd and I love going to that pub. It's Connolly's pub. And we're really privileged, Thomas, to have had you play your music. Thomas plays in various orchestras in Ireland while he's over here, and he's doing a course in WEAll. You might like to tell us that, Thomas, how you got onto the course. And then I'm going to ask you, and you might just follow it on, about what you think the role of the artist is as a catalyst for the well-being economy. Over to you, Thomas.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to listen to everybody and to play for you all. So I guess I had a bit of an advantage in learning Irish because I had spent a little time in Palestine actually before coming to Ireland learning the Arabic language. So I was teaching at a music school there, and the opportunity to learn that language really helped me with the Irish language. So since I've come to Ireland, I've had the opportunity to learn Irish and to begin taking a course at WEAll an diploma sa Gaeilge Aimach, and it's been a really great experience for me. And I suppose that would
Bravo, Thomas. So, yeah, great. So what do you think the role of the artist is? Any comments on what you've heard or what your own personal opinion is?
Well, I feel personally that the artist, I guess because I'm a classical musician, perhaps we're a little bit different in terms of our orientation towards creation and creativity. Often we're not, and this goes for other musicians too, traditional musicians, we're not necessarily composing or creating, but we're preserving or kind of conserving a tradition. So I feel in a way that the artist can act as a intermediary between tradition and innovation, and kind of connect with the past as well as the future and the present. And I think a lot of things that people said about ideas coming from different time periods and coming from ancient times, I think that's really important as well, even though in the current space we often feel like we have to reinvent the wheel and make everything new. So that would be my view on the artist.
Great, thank you. Well, I think what you've done tonight in playing the music, and certainly as you go to sing your couple of songs, and I will come back to that in a second, you've created a space, and Matt talked about that earlier on. Artists create space, and very often I think musicians do that. They create a different space for us as well. The other thing I have to say that a lot of people in Ireland, having spent 14 years in school learning Irish, come out with probably just a couple of sentences. And I think you're an absolute example for what can be done in a short space of time if people are willing. So within 4 years to become absolutely fluent, and I really mean that, everybody, he's absolutely fluent in Irish. So bravo, Cogardchas Hamáis Tatu Araus. So one of the songs, yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
Like Ni Kredjum Nachwil Gaeilge Ag Dini. I think that there is Irish, like a lot of people have Irish that wouldn't admit it. So I think that a lot of people ta Tishkent na Gaeilge Ag Alon Dini Ke Nachwil she had Muninach Arohin Anohin.
Great. Yeah, and that comes back to Padder Kirby about what Padder says about Irish giving us self-confidence. So Thomas is just saying that most Irish people have Irish, but they usually hide the knowledge they have of it. Anyway, let's just go. I know you're going to sing. The first song is Breed Og Ní Bhaile. It's most people will recognize the air. It's a beautiful song, a love song, as most Irish ones were regretting a lost love, I think. And then the second song, I think, is a song from Connemara. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and you can run from one into the other. So Gurmil Magav, and thank you everybody who participated tonight, to all the speakers, especially to Thomas, to the crew in Carlow with Davy, and to my own colleagues on the steering group, if we call them that. And you should all be aware, we're all doing this on a voluntary basis, but I think it's really exciting what we're doing, creating the space. And I really love the idea of radical participation. I think what we're going to do is we're going to create a real radical participation in Ireland. So Gurmil Magav Galer, and over to you, Thomas.
Abri jogni wale studog mochri krote Dag du aring yachawa shegol frichertlar mochri. Tana keit a farin grale da eden huin herach. Is gedog tu bahar brachtach der hirori masfir. Nil ni bet ni sole nan gealach os kjona tale. Na bla banen ni vis ik faser drayan. O shud mar vis mo grasa in gach trill shile brachtach. Melin malen apartje nach neer na rief klion. Show me kalin sperul adem meo geheske. Es rosa shida glesta es shoda gachtli. Ach bar lambrit marchela na in rina grega. Nar vi helen haring dan lerskris is kagu en dream. So aire ta di kelort møre de tu lam an teva. Na fagen shalom henes me go heg nach insani. Ta da hech mora yenev fwi omri an edan. Agus beim we jan geherach moliner vegan kis. Is gavek habar at leva nora viens an grien e gairi. Nil de vagan så sper an a gange jins an gui. Dan brokker heva lenan, tan sjönach a roer na peka. Dan geri eik poch leim nile pleasure in savrioch. Is ta hu na maig pliske si de tiach ta wale gemrach. Nach bin jas kjolne nein ans na glanter jach na hi. Ta han fars of an in je nacht, gegraver lenne gela. Is an shanden a veg na kete blin wada lische heel. Ta kirke banis ornan, ta fatjes aran geloran, ta kerueg lacht boher an gas faltje riv gach nein. Ta O'Reilly shenem kjolan, ta finis a brandis bjoran. Goludur dina mora sa tere giddarinj. Ta han stille reki gonian, sna bara lina. Ta kerueg flannery vega shiri an e gol. Ta han sager ta han iskora, gawi ha en Josha. Is a waira tog mo chorla o taris e lilam. Gurmagwif.
Great. Gurmil Magat, agus Slan Gachenia. And thank you all very much.